Hi, good afternoon and greetings. Welcome to EPLI Asia's neighborhood. My name is Sudesh Sridharan and I'm the CEO of EPLI Asia neighborhood. Welcome to our sixth webinar in our Arts and Science series. And the topic for today is managing employees' non-performance at our workplace. Interesting to note that we have more than 800 people registered today for today's session. Do share and invite your colleagues and friends to our future webinars. For those who are viewing these webinars on YouTube, please click the subscribe button and you'll be able to view the videos from our previous webinars here. Do share the videos on our ePly Asia YouTube channel to your colleagues and friends. Also, look up ePly Asia on LinkedIn and Facebook and join us there for updates on EPLI and our future webinars. EPLI, or Employment Practices Liability Insurance, is a HR risk management solution that was designed by EPLI Asia's neighborhood. It is a standalone employment insurance for Malaysian employers that protects you against wrongful dismissal claims that arise from an employment dispute. EPLI Asia offers a 3-in-1 solution whereby we educate, advise, and protect businesses in employment-related disputes. Many of our customers who have actually signed up and have purchased the EPLI policy since 2014 will agree with me when I actually say that they have benefited from the advice and guidance provided by our partners, IHR Consulting Neighborhood and Mecca Employers Consulting Agencies Neighborhood, who between them have more than 40 years of experience in the field of HR and industrial relations. So, do you want good advice for your IR-related issues? For details on how your company can actually purchase the EPLI policy from EPLI Asia's neighborhood, do visit us on our website, www.epliasia.com, or email us your contact details to epli@epliasia.com, and we will contact you as soon as possible. Also join us on our product briefings, which is conducted via Zoom every Thursday live at 2 p.m. So coming back to the Arts and Science series for today. Once again, we have our experts, Supra and Damat. And this time around, we have our guest panelist, Mr. To Siew Pat, joining us. Well, exciting topic. So let's kick off this presentation and discussion by me introducing our HR expert and moderator for the session, Mr. Subramayam Nabasamy. But before I hand over the session to Subra, a question to the experts today. You will agree that performance management and monitoring is a difficult and tedious task as it takes time to constantly monitor and manage employee performance. And we do know that in many organizations, there are no KPIs or unrealistic KPIs are actually set for their employees, which makes it even more a challenge to manage and monitor them. So given this, and with the current norms of working from home, is it really possible to manage employee base on their performance based on the KPIs? Or my question to you is, should organizations relook at the performance management system that they currently have and revise their KPIs, giving the consideration to the challenges that employees may have due to the current work environment? You know, working from home is really stressful, right? So over to you, Supra.
Hi, thank you, Sukdev. A very good afternoon, everyone. Welcome again to EPLI's July Art and Science Series. It's really good to know that we've got 800 participants. That's 200 more than last month. Our topic for today, the art and science of managing employee non-performance at workplace. And our goals is firstly to establish and understand the importance of having a robust performance management system as a tool to managing employee performance. Secondly, is to understand our responsibility as an employer when dealing and managing a non-performance issue. Understand what a performance improvement plan is all about and what's the objective of it. And lastly, to understand the legislative procedures when dealing and managing a non-performance issue, both for a probationer and confirmed employees. I think the irony is that appraisals are sometimes done once a year, and then we go to the employees and tell the employees that they are not performing, and thereafter we will like to exercise our employees' right of dismissing them due to non-performance. And the question is, what is the best approach and practice? So today, together with all the two panels that I have, we will explore this in detail. I have two experienced panelists who are subject matter experts. Firstly, our panel lawyer, Mr. Daman Sivalingam, the managing partner of Daman Sivalingam and Partners, with more than 25 years of experience in IR and labor matters. I think I've kept repeating that all the time. And we have Mr. To Siupat, a HR consultant. He was with the Royal Malaysian Police for 14 years and subsequently in the corporate world for 25 years as a HR practitioner. And during that period, he has done a lot of speaking engagement and training for a period of 15 years. He is also a life member of MI HRM. He also has won the HR Leader Award, the Gold Star in 2017 for under the Malaysian HR Awards. Besides that, he is also a Maxwell certified DISC behavioral analysis trainer. Wow, Mr. To. Welcome, Mr. Daman. Welcome, Mr. To. Come on board.
Hi, Supra, and good afternoon, everyone.
Hello,
Hi,
everyone.
hi. Hi, Mr. To. Hi, Daman. How are you guys?
Good, thanks.
Great, great.
How's the 2 months been sitting at home?
I think it might be fair to say that a lot of us today might want to put the Malaysian government on a PIP.
So, have you been performing or not, both of you?
Depends on who you ask.
Okay, let's get started. Yeah, there are various definitions of performance, right? In a general perspective, it means the act of performing, carrying out an action, execution, achievement. But what is performance management from the context of employment? Maybe I'd like to start with Mr. To first to give the HR perspective, then we talk about the legal side of it.
Thank you, Mr. Supra. Warm welcome to all the viewers on Facebook and YouTube and all that. It's such an honor to speak before an 800 crowd audience. I normally speak to a small crowd, usually 3 persons, just me, myself, and I. They are my fantastic supporters. Thank you for the question. And so, what is performance in the employment perspective? Right? To me, performance must be aligned with and to achieve the organization's visions, missions, or you want to call it OKR, you want to call it KRA, or whatever you want to call it. So, if performance is not aligned to all these, then that performance is a non-performance as far as I'm concerned. Right? Let's say if you have an order to produce 1 million items, and here you are running around the store and all that, you are performing. You're doing something, but what you're doing is, are your actions aligned to producing that 1 million items or not? If it is aligned, fine. That's good performance. But if you're running, making yourself look busy and not producing anything, then that performance is wasted. That's my view. Back to you.
Mr. Davan, what's your perspective as a lawyer?
Okay, so Supra, the way I look at this, from a legal perspective, I think ultimately this whole area of performance management comes back to the basics of contract law. Don't forget, an employment relationship is based on an employment contract between employer and employee. So what is actually happening here is that the employer is of the view that under the contract, I have some obligations and you as the employee have some obligations. My obligations as an employer is to provide you with work to do. And your obligations as an employee is to do the work that you are required to do. So what is happening in a performance management issue is that the employer is of the view that I am not getting the performance that I have contracted to obtain, for which I believe I'm paying. So that is a simplistic way of putting it. Of course, as what Mr. To and you mentioned earlier, you see, measuring what you are supposed to perform, as using Mr. To's example of that 1 million items, that may not be stipulated in the contract. But the employer is of the view that you are supposed to produce 1 million. So when I don't see you producing 1 million, I am thinking you are now breaching your contract because that's my expectation under the contract. So I think that's how I would frame it. From a legal perspective, it comes back to one party viewing that you're not doing what you are supposed to do under the contract that both of us signed.
You have immediately triggered me to the next question, but I think I will keep it to the later part of it, right? I'll go through the sequence that I've got. We tend to use this saying that, employee performance affects the organizational performance. So, Mr. To, from your 25 years of experience in the corporate world, what are your thoughts on this?
My thoughts are, yes, definitely employees' performance affects the organizational performance. If a particular employee is not up to the mark, it will drag down the whole team. And similarly, the employer's reaction to the employee's performance also affects the organization's performance. Because if the employer doesn't do anything about that particular employee who is not performing, those around him will be affected, and their morale may be affected, their productivity may also be affected, and in the end, the whole organization will get dragged down. So I would agree, yes, individually, employees' performance affects the organization's performance, and the employer's reaction to the employee's performance also affects the organization's performance. Back to you.
Thanks, Mr. To. There could be many factors affecting an employee's performance, yeah? Could we share some common factors that affect their performance? Because to just completely blame an employee for non-performance, as a HR practitioner and consultant, I feel is unfair, right? But sometimes we wear the employer's hat. So, it's very difficult for you to sometimes want to take the blame for it, right? But we have to look at it from a total organizational perspective, right? I'd like Mr. Daman to share some info as well, but we'll start with Mr. To first.
Yeah, I think there are many issues which affects the employee's performance. Yeah. I totally agree with you that we should not point fingers and put the blame squarely on the employee just because he's not performing. So do a root cause analysis and find out how many organizations out there really do a root cause analysis to find out what went wrong. Sometimes a top performer may suddenly become disillusioned or demotivated because maybe he has been overlooked for promotion. He has been performing, but he has not been rewarded for his contribution to the company, and that may have pissed him off, and then slowly the performance may decline. Or maybe because of personality clashes between him and his superior, and then maybe he was put somewhere for a reason. Maybe the company has got a good reason, but from the employee's perspective, he may be thinking, wow, okay, Yeah? So it's communication, different perspectives. I would say there are many factors that contributes to an employee's performance, and an employer plays a very important role in motivating the employee to perform up to the standard that they expect of him. So the legal side, maybe we will ask Darman to share his views. Over to you, Darman.
Yeah, I guess as what has been shared, right? There are a whole host of reasons which could impact performance. I think ultimately the performance is being undertaken by a human being, and a human being is not beyond emotions. It could be personal reasons that can even impact your performance at work. It could be like examples that Mr. Tu mentioned about dissatisfaction that the employee may perceive in the treatment that he or she has received. So I guess there are a whole host of reasons. Possibly the more typical reasons you find in cases which go to court would be that the employee's output or the what the employee has produced is not meeting the expectations of the court. Typically, it tends to be because there could be a skill gap or a knowledge gap. That's the typical cases that you find an employee has been dismissed for because the employer has made a call that the employee has a gap in skills or knowledge or know-how, which couldn't be closed, and therefore the termination followed that. But it's very difficult to confine. I think the whole host of reasons could lead to someone underperforming.
Thanks, Raman. Thanks, Rizzo. So, what do you think really that, when we are doing performance measurement, what are we really measuring, right? It's like, timeliness, quality of work, cost management, conduct, and all that. So, how do you kind of put this into perspective so that you can really measure in a more objective manner, like, instead of, what, typically we have come across a lot of situations where, yeah, this employee not performing. So when you say, what is he not performing? How is he not performing? What are the areas? So then we get stuck in that. So maybe, Mr. Tu, you'd like to highlight some case studies or experiences.
Mm. To me, I think most important is to identify the KRAs. Okay? Different companies may have different ways of measuring performance. Some go by OKR, which is objective key results. Some go by KRAs. So identify your KRA, which are the key result areas. What are the key result areas? So, for example, a salesman, you want him to achieve 1 million sales, let's say. Okay? That is your KRA. That is his KRA. Okay? So is timeliness an important issue? Whether he comes to office on time, he doesn't come to office on time, is it key to his performance or not? To me, maybe it's not key as long as he's able to produce that 1 million sales, whether he makes the call from his home or whether he do it over the internet, especially during the current COVID-19 situation where it's difficult to move around. You can do sales over the internet. Yeah? As long as he's resourceful enough, he meets the KRAs. Of course, when we put indicators to the KRA, that those indicators become KPIs, key performance indicators. Right, your sales is your KRA, but the 1 million sales is your indicator. That 1 million will indicate whether you have achieved the 1 million or not. You see, so I mean, different organizations, you can call it whatever way you want it. To me, that's how I would measure employee performance. Just identify what are the KRAs and set a SMART KPIs using the SMART principle. I'm sure everyone knows what's the SMART principle. No need to elaborate. That's my view. Thank you.
So what happens in a situation, right, where you're talking about majority of Malaysian businesses are SME businesses, right? You don't have a huge HR department to sit down with the line managers to, design your KRA, KPIs and all that. So you don't have a clear established KRA and KPI. You only got like a job description, and your last item on the job description is always whatever I ask you to do, okay? Or has and when instructed by the management of the company, right? So how would you perceive this, Mr. Daman, from as a lawyer when you are taking on a case, right? And your client has terminated an employee. There's no clear guideline in KRA or KPI or whatsoever, and they say, Daman, he's not for me. So how would you tackle that?
Okay, so you see, from a legal perspective, the law is the same. The requirements for an employer to justify a dismissal on grounds of performance would be, number one, that the employee is aware or is notified of the areas of his poor performance. So I think that's the question that you've asked is around that first condition. In established companies, you probably would be able to point to a document to cite the KPIs, KRAs, the outputs, right. So you will have all of that written down. The more established the company, they'll have elaborate, detailed job descriptions and activities to be done and reporting and so on. But in smaller companies, often that could just be by way of a discussion between the owner of the company and the employee concerned. So this is where in court then it becomes an issue. The employer bears the burden, so the employer will have to show to the satisfaction of the judge that the employee was notified or aware of the gap. And if you're going to rely on a communication, you take the risk with it, because the employee most likely in court is going to say, he never told me that. And then it's for the judge to decide who do I believe over the other. And it's easy to be, when you bear the burden, as the employer does, the employee will turn around and say, okay, if you bear the burden, you must prove that I am aware. And now here you are in court and saying the only evidence that you have to show that I'm aware is this purported conversation which you say you had with me, which I am denying. And therefore, if you put yourself in the shoes of the judge, you might probably think, I am not satisfied that the employer took reasonable steps to inform the employee about the gap in performance. And chances are the judge is going to say, you failed the test, Mr. Employer. So
Thanks, Daman.
yeah, that's a challenge. You
So
cannot.
if I've got a clear KPI and all that, so I stand a better chance in winning in court,
Without a doubt.
right? So now my next question is to Mr. To. So how, when it comes to sales team, it's kind of easy, you can measure based, I give you 100,000, you need to do 100 sales call, whatever. But how do you then handle measurements and all that when dealing with non-salesy, right? So maybe you can give one group as an example. I'm not asking you to do the whole organization.
Yeah. Okay. So for support team, the support team, the back end, the bedroom guys, maybe we can look at HR, right? How does HR support the operational guys? Yeah. The operational guys, their number one reason will be, I don't have enough manpower. That throughout my 25 years career, I've heard it 1,001 times, millions of times, I would say. Favorite excuse. Anyway, I think it's legitimate. I won't deny that. So how do we set a KPI for the HR team? I would set a time to fill, TTF, time to fill. If there is a vacancy, how long does it take you as the HR to fill up that vacancy? Okay, of course, different levels, different complexities, may require different timelines. Let's say a general worker. You should be able to fill it up pretty fast as compared to maybe a CFO or sales director or whatever. That position may take a longer time to fill. Let's say we have agreed that a general worker position, is vacant, and the HR keep it vacant for 2 months. Then I would say, if the agreed KPI is 1 month, then you would have failed to meet the KPI. Yeah, filling up the position is your KRA. The 1 month timeline is your performance indicator. That's one example. Second, let's look at procurement department. Procurement, if you are doing sales, that's definitely the procurement department needs to bring in the products so that the sales team can sell. And if the sales team sells the item and the procurement or the delivery logistic department or the warehouse department doesn't ship out that item, let's say you buy an aircon, how much time do you give your sales guy? I think by this morning you order, this evening you will expect a guy to come to your house and fix up the aircon, right? And if that team fails to support the sales guy, then that support department has also failed. The KPI is within 24 hours, you have to reach your customer's place and fix up the aircon. Those are the indicators, KPIs and all that. But every department, every company, the KPI is unique. They have to sit down and agree and establish the agreed KPIs so that everyone is aware and everyone works towards those KPIs. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. To. Okay, I think right now we got to go into the part 2 of our topic, which is we are talking about poor performance or underperformance or non-performance, right? Could we establish like a baseline, because sometimes we use poor performance, we say underperformance, we use, non-performance. Mr. To, maybe I start with Mr. Daman. As a lawyer, maybe he has got better perspective in understanding the poor performance or underperformance issue.
Okay, so again, I will go with the fallback on the legal principles, right? Mm-hmm. So the first requirement which I shared earlier is that the employee must be notified or made aware of the area of underperformance. The words that the law uses, the second requirement that the law requires is that the employee must be given sufficient opportunity to improve. The third requirement will answer your question. And I know it doesn't answer it perfectly because legal language, sometimes you cannot quantify. But the third requirement in law is that after notifying the employee about the gap in performance, after giving the employee sufficient opportunity to improve, and here's the third requirement, the employee did not improve sufficiently. Okay, so it is not a ruler which you can pull out and measure and say, oh, okay, you met the minimum, you met the baseline that is. So you will have to fall back on each individual case. But I think I would like to just say, add on a little bit more on what Mr. To mentioned. If you want to do this seriously, it requires every employee in the organization to be absolutely clear about their role in the organization. You've got to start with that if you want to treat performance management properly. There must be no one in the organization who's unclear about their role. And that's really a lot of communications generally. Yeah, so I will stop with that.
Thanks, Daman. Mr. To.
Yes, sir.
So who is responsible for managing performance? HR or the line managers? Or maybe there's something else as well.
I think the top management has to set the performance level expected out of each department, and it has to cascade down to each individual department. And each individual department, the HODs will have to come up with their own performance level that's going to, in the end, meet the company's overall final objective. Yeah? If every department were to set different KPIs, performance levels, then there will be disarray in the organization. So I would say we need a strong leadership from the top to tell them, hey, I want this, and cascade it down. And you guys, as the line managers, please go and think how you can support this. And all that will be collected, collated, and sent to HR. HR could be the coordinator, the monitoring role. But in the end, I think the responsibility falls on the line manager. Back to you.
Thanks, Mr. To. So when it comes to dealing with non-performance, right, there are many factors that can actually contribute. We spoke about factors contributing to performance. But right now, I would like to explore a bit further about factors that can influence the non-performance, because there is a tendency that we only blame the employee that you didn't perform. Okay. So I think if we fundamentally really understand all the factors that contributes to a non-performance, then at least, we will not jump the gun and say, just blame somebody, but, evaluate all these factors before we come to a conclusion that the person is not performing. So maybe you'd like to share some examples. Mr. To first.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, I do agree. There are many factors. And later on during my sharing, I will share with you what are the factors that can affect employees' performance. I will give one simple example. Look at the recruitment process. Did we bring in the right person or not? Okay? That's where we go back to the job, the JD and the JS, the job specification and the job description. I'm sure a lot of viewers here are football fans. Let's say, I say, I need an excellent footballer. Go and find me an excellent footballer. And you guys will go out and find the top scorer in the world, pay millions to bring him in. Then I put him in the goalkeeper's role. You think he's going to perform? And whose fault is that now? Yeah? Is that the fault of the person who recruited the footballer, or is it the footballer's fault? He was a fantastic top goal scorer. Can't blame him, can't deny him. But we put him in the role, different role. His skill sets are not there. Similarly, in the organization, I'm just sharing one example of the recruitment. Okay? You can recruit the top sales guy. He's a top car sales guy. He can sell Ferrari and all those things. You ask him to go and sell air cons and see, he won't be able to perform because the market is different. The technology, the sales pitch is all different. Yeah? Strategies are all different. And he has to be trained. And if he's not trained in that area, he's not going to perform. That's one area. Later on, I'll share more things. Back to you.
Thanks. Daman, could you share from your experience, going to court and all that, what was the common factor that you have identified that an employee is not performing?
Generally, if you look at, my view is that if you look at cases, I know it's simplistic to say this, but it becomes quite apparent when you read cases where employers have won that the gap in the performance is clear to the judge. And I think the second most important aspect is the judge was satisfied with the motivation of the employer. That's the most important thing. The motivation must be to help, right? So if even though an employee is not performing and the gap is demonstrable, but if the employer doesn't approach it with the right approach to help or give the employee an opportunity to improve, you end up losing. So I would suggest that the gap to be clearly demonstrable and the intention to help must come out clearly. That's really what you will see in cases where employers end up winning.
Okay, right now to just go through, performance management is technically like what we have discussed. It's a continuous process. It doesn't just happen at year end when you want to decide whether I want to give bonus this year or not, or increment is coming up. 2022 is coming up. I don't want to talk about 2021, right? But the key is performance management has got to be like a continuous process, because from the time, like Mr. To just said, when someone is being onboarded, recruited, right, they are going through a probationary period, right? So then you got to measure their performance and all that, because from the little that I understand, that you cannot simply terminate a probationer. Correct that, Mr. Daman? And how do we
Yeah.
manage a probationer's performance, and how do we satisfy the court that we have done right with the probationer in terms of assessment and all that before we decide to terminate him?
So, I mean, again, if you look at the cases, right, the law will come back to the three things, whether you're a probationer or a confirmed staff. Sure, with probationers, the courts are maybe a little bit more forgiving from an employer perspective. They may be a little bit more willing to accept less than robust practices, because probation by definition tells you that you don't have security of tenure, right? So section 20 is all about security of tenure. So if you're on probation, you're not accorded security of tenure, which is why the law doesn't allow reinstatement for probationers. They give you a maximum of 12 months compensation. Yeah, so the law is a little bit less rigid, but you must still show the three things, i.e., was the employee made aware of the areas of poor performance? Was there sufficient opportunity to improve? And despite doing all of this, was there insufficient improvement? So you must be able to demonstrate this. Best case will be by way of documentation. If you're going to leave it to discussions, be prepared for the employee to turn around and dispute the discussions.
Okay, say the probation period is 3 months. I did not manage to do my assessment lah. So what would be your best advice? Should I extend for another 3 months and then redo so it's like technically like a probationary PIP lah.
Yeah, so if you haven't done the assessment, I think you shouldn't be thinking of terminating, right? Yeah, if the employer has been lazy and then now you didn't do your steps and then you want to take the easy way out, you can, but be prepared to take a checkbook to court lah. So I guess, you see, ultimately the law is logic. If you want to terminate someone, and as we all know here, that the law looks at it as this is the rice bowl of someone, is very pro-employee. So if you want to pull out the nuclear bomb, you better make sure you have the evidence to demonstrate that there was a world war and hence you pulled out the nuclear bomb.
So what you are saying here is the probationer still almost has the same right as a confirmed employee. The only difference here is, is whether it's 12 months or 24 months in terms of compensation. If I lose in
Yeah,
court, lah.
I would say that just because you're a probationer doesn't mean you can sack someone as and when you like. So you will still have to demonstrate the same thing. Your consequences, yes, is less serious for an employer.
So in the case of a confirmed employee, permanent employee, right? So to manage a non-performer out kind of thing, we have come across this thing called PIP, a performance improvement plan. But in my understanding, when you put something called performance improvement plan, you genuinely are trying to work with the employee to improve the performance, right? But because of issues where, because you didn't have PIP in place, that's why you lost in court. So I see a trend where companies say, I have done PIP, so now I can terminate. Mr. To, maybe you want to share from your experience.
Yeah, I think PIP is just a term, a terminology which we give to a process where we want to help an employee to improve the performance. While the terminology may be correct, but the psychological effect of it could be negative to the employee, because once the employee hears that, oh, I've been put on a PIP, he goes into the defensive. He thinks that the management is out there going out to go after him. So maybe HR practitioners out there, we are not obligated to use the word PIP, or performance improvement plan. If you can come up with a better terminology, why not? Better sounding terminology, which says that, look, we are here to help you improve your performance. Well, of course, there's nothing wrong with PIP, but maybe we can come up with a better terminology. Yeah. So my view is that, yes, as I agree with Mr. Diamond, that PIP is our intentions, the management's intentions. Yeah, it should be an intention to help the employee to improve his performance so that he can be confirmed or he can improve on his performance. But some employers, they just do PIP just to say, oh, yeah, I fulfilled the requirements, I've done my PIP, so now he has not improved, and okay, bye-bye. Some employers have that sort of a mindset. I mean, to these employers, I think it's best that you relook at your mindsets. That's all.
So, Mr. Daman, PIP, is it mandatory under the industrial law? Meaning if I have not done something called and use the word PIP and all that, would it put the company, in trouble in the sense that, the chairman of court will look at my case less favorably?
See, the PIP does not have the force of law, meaning to say it doesn't mean that if you have a PIP, automatic dismissal fair. If you don't have a PIP, automatic dismissal unfair. There's no such thing. You could have a PIP and still lose your case. You could not have a PIP and still win your case. Because like I said, the court looks at the three things. Generally, the accepted norm is that the three things are proved through a PIP. Because if somebody is on a PIP, you can say for sure he knows about the gap in performance. Was he given an opportunity to improve? The PIP will be for X number of months and there will be tools stated. And did he still not improve after that? The PIP should record that. So it's the norm to use a PIP, but it is not the only method to demonstrate underperformance in court.
Okay, that leads me to my last question before we start our presentation. Is there like a guesstimate or estimate time frame that, say, if I do the PIP for 3 months or 6 months, then after that, so when I do my termination, because the law also says give the employee enough time, to improve and all that. So from, both your experiences, right? Is it 3 months? Is it 6 months? What's the right amount of time?
Maybe let me.
Someone you want to start first?
Okay. So you see, this is why earlier I used the definition in law. Opportunity to improve is what the courts use. So it doesn't prescribe a monthly timeline. So sufficient, fair opportunity to improve. What does that mean? To me, I would say that typically 3 months would be a fair time generally, but I guess if the gap is so huge that realistically to expect someone to close that gap within 3 months is impossible, I would be guided by a longer time. Or if, for example, the cycle, let's say the sales cycle of a particular employee is 6 months, then it would seem to synchronize my PIP, I would tie it back to the 6-month cycle, because that gives me the data at the end of the 6 months to decide whether the person improved or not. But generally speaking, I would like to think that 3 months, close follow-up, robust management, you should have data to determine whether someone is improving sufficiently or not. But you need to take take that with a pinch of salt depending on the circumstances of the case.
Mr. To, you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I would agree to a certain extent with Mr. Daman. Let's use what I would like to echo what you have said. The court would like to look at, have we given him sufficient opportunity to improve? Now, what is sufficient opportunity? Okay? Let me share with you an example. Let's say a cashier works in a restaurant, and somehow every day there is shortages of. At the end of the day, when they total up the cash, there's shortages, and occasionally there could be surplus. I know this cashier is a super honest cashier, and then short means short, more means more. He doesn't take the money, but somehow it just doesn't tally. Now, how much time do we need to give this cashier to improve? 3 months, 6 months? I mean, we are all so fixated with 3 and 6. Somehow the 3 and 6 become magical numbers stuck in our head. But I would say for this sort of cases, why not leave it to the management to sit down with the cashier and say, hello, I notice, every day you're short of 5 cents, 10 cents, $1, $2. Can you improve or not? How long a time frame do you need? 1 week, 2 weeks? Well, it could be that sort of scenario. So, I mean, yes, if you're talking about where the sales cycle or where the cycle is a bit long, where a salesman, we have given him a certain target to achieve, and he doesn't perform. And these are all cyclical sales, project sales could take a few months before you can get into a sales. So maybe the time frame could be a bit longer. To me, I would say it all depends on the circumstances, and let both parties. I think PIP, we have to look at PIP holistically. PIP is not just say, hey, I give you 3 months, let's be done with it. Sit down, like what Mr. Daman said, it has to be proven to the court, through some form of documents or whatever, that we both we sat down, we agreed, let's say in the cashier scenario, both of us agreed that within 1 week, you should be able to resolve that shortage issue. And I've given you training. I've shown you how to calculate, how to give change, and how to use the cashing, the cash machine, so that you give the correct change to the customer and all those things. If all this can be demonstrated, I think you would have a good case. But if you sit down and say, no, 1 week, I think you're going to lose it. You're going to lose it big time. Back to you.
Cool. Thank you, Daman. Thank you, Mr. To. Right. I still got some questions, but I think I'll keep it for after the presentation. Like right now, I'd like to call upon Mr. To start his presentation first. Daman, you can go and have a cup of coffee. Starbucks is sending one to you right now.
Right. Thank you. Allow me to share slides. I'm going to share my slide. Okay, guys. Yep. Once again, thank you to all the viewers on YouTube and Facebook. Welcome to our talk. Today, we're going to talk about the art and science of managing employee non-performance at the workplace. So let's explore the art and the science involved. Now, imagine this, guys. Imagine this. You are the HR or you're the HOD or whatever. And I say HR because I believe today's audience are mainly from the HR field, because I've posted today's seminar, webinar in a lot of places. So I believe most of you are in HR. And during your company's management meeting, your number one boss, your chairman, asked a certain HOD, he said, hey, how come your department is not performing? You have missed the target. And that HOD says, well, I have this guy who is under me and he's not performing. That's why he's dragging the whole department's performance down. And now the chairman turns to you and you're the HR there and he says, hey, HR, can you please do something about it? I'm sure all this sounds very familiar to you guys, right? So now what are you guys going to do as HR or whether you're HOD or whatever? You can put it into the chat box, you can put it into the comment section. What are you going to do about it now? Okay. Right? I believe most of you will be thinking, well, we just have to sit down with the guy and do a PIP. Now, wait. Let me ask you this question. What is the best way to manage poor performance? My sharing with you is the best way to manage poor performance is not to have any poor performance in your organization. As simple as that, right? You may say, man, it's not possible. How can we don't have poor performance? Well, I would ask you, have you applied the science of management? If we have applied the science of management, we would be able to increase our percentage, our chances of not hiring a poor performer. Or you can put it the other way around and say, increase our chances of hiring a high performer. But we all know it's not so simple. Yeah? There's a science, there's an art to it. Later, if we have time, or maybe another session, we have time, we can explore that. Yeah? But if for somehow we recruited someone and he turns out to be non-performing, then what is your management team doing about it during that person's probationary period? Okay? If you have been actively monitoring his performance, managing his performance, he should either turn out to be a good performer, and if it is confirmed that he's not a good performer, poor performer, you should be able to manage him within that probationary period. But how many organizations really look seriously into during the probationary period? In most organizations, the HR will say, yeah, I've done my job. I recruited the guy for you. Now it's your baby. And the HOD may say, yeah, I didn't even know I have to manage this guy and all that. You are supposed to do the performance appraisal and all that. And there goes the finger pointing. But remember, there's a survey that 30% of your employees are engaged. 50% are disengaged. And 20% are actively disengaged. And these are the 20% because we did not manage them properly. Yeah? That's why we have this poor performance issue in our company. Yeah? Now, let's say if we go to a race course, yeah, and we see 8 horses there, and you're going to place a bet on one of the horses, and that horse won the race. To whom would you attribute the success to? Is it to the horse, the jockey, the trainer, or you because you picked the correct horse? Right? You can think about it. I believe most of us will say, yeah, I did a good job because out of the 8 horses, I picked the right horse. So the credit goes to me. Well, I don't deny that. Yeah? Because you have done your homework, you have done your science, you have studied all the horses, you have studied their history, their win-loss history. Now, if we go back to the same situation, same race course, and you put your money on one of the horse, and the horse came out last. Now, who would you blame? Is it the horse, the jockey, the trainer, or you? I'm sure you don't blame the horse. Blame yourself. Why you bet on that horse? Similarly, in the organization scenario, yeah, when we have a poor performer, we tend to put the blame on the poor performer. Have we looked at ourselves about the company? Why did we select this horse? How did we manage this horse? Sorry, I don't mean to equate the employee to a horse, but this is just a analogy, okay? Just to share this, to show to you the scenario there. Yeah? If we pick the wrong employee, blame ourselves. Just like the scenario I mentioned earlier, if we hired the wrong footballer and put him in the goal as a goalkeeper, blame ourselves. Don't blame the footballer. He is a fantastic footballer. So that's how sometimes poor performance come about, because management made a mistake during the hiring process. Okay, but for today's discussion, I'm going to look at leadership and how leadership affects poor performance. I'm looking at the management's perspective. Don't get me wrong, I'm neither pro-management or pro-employee. It's just that for today's discussion, I would like to look at from the management's perspective. Now, leadership, how many organizations, just look around in your own organizations, yeah? Reflect back, yeah? How many organizations have visionary leaders, especially during this current situation, who are able to see the forest and not just the trees? Or are they also lost in the forest? Yeah? We have so many new policies coming out from the MKN every day. Every MCO, whatever MCO you call it, they will come up with new regulation, new rules. How many of your leaders are visionary enough and say, hey guys, let's sit down and come up with this policy so that we can manage, everyone is clear of what is expected, and we manage everyone transparently so that we don't have miscommunication and later on say, oh, this guy is not performing, that guy is not performing, and all those things. How many of your leaders are strategic enough? Do they have a strategy enough? Okay. Now, the ministry is telling us that if we want to operate, we must do the swab test twice a week. That is a tremendous cost to the company. So what is your strategy? Do you have or you don't have? Right? Think about it. Or you just say, okay, if the ministry says we have to do it 2 times, we do 2 times. Well, it's going to eat into your cost. So later on, then we say, you see, the HR is not strategic, they never plan, they are not strategic enough. That's why this fellow is not performing, that fellow is not performing. Whether your leaders are focused or not. And do they have the courage, to call a spade a spade? If somebody is not performing, be courageous enough. Bite the bullet and say, hello, friend. I don't think you're up to the mark, man. Can we sit down and discuss this or not? And come up with something, and hopefully you will be able to meet our expectations. Someone who's able to see the big elephant in the room. Yeah, just like the Malay proverb, they say, kuman di seberang laut nampak, tapi gajah di pelupuk mata tak nampak. Yeah? We can see the big elephant, the kuman at the other end, but the big elephant in the room, we pretend not to see. Well, sometimes it's the big elephant. Your own HODs who are maybe stumbling blocks to the employee's performance. And then you blame the employee. Tackle your own people first. Make sure they are up to the mark so that they can lead and guide their downlines to perform to expectations. And do we have leaders who are decisive or not? Decisive when it comes to decision making. Sometimes you have people, you go up to them and say, boss, how do we handle this? Or boss, we have these two options. Which one do you think I should pick? And your boss is unable to guide you. Well, yeah, we may be smiling, we may be laughing, yeah, but we have this style of leaders. And how does it help? And later on, if things goes wrong, your boss is going to say, there you are. You are not performing. But in your heart, you will be thinking, I asked you, you can't even guide me. You're not decisive enough. So who's to blame now? Are you going to blame the boss or are you going to blame yourself? Who is not performing? Yeah. What I'm trying to share with you today is just to provoke you so that you think, actually, where does the fault lies? Yeah. I can go on about leadership and all those things, but today we are not talking about leadership. We are talking about non-performance. So I'm going to touch a little bit more on leadership before I move on to poor performance. Right? As Mr. Subra says, this is my mentor, John Maxwell, and he says everything rises and falls on leadership, which is very, very true. If your company doesn't have that leadership, the chances of your company going down is greater. But if your company has an excellent leadership, well, motivation will be higher, chances of productivity will be higher, and meeting your goals and targets will be higher. There was once an author who said that average leaders raise the bar on themselves. Good leaders raise the bar for others. Great leaders inspires others to raise their own bar. Well, isn't that powerful? If you can be a great leader and you can inspire others to raise their own bar, wouldn't that be fantastic? Wouldn't you want to be in that category? If you aspire to be there, improve yourself, improve your leadership skills, and one day you will be there. Steve Jobs says, management is about persuading people to do things they do not want to do. Management is about persuading people to do things they do not want to do. Leadership is about inspiring people to do things they never thought they could. Think about it. Powerful. Management is about persuading people to do things they do not want to do. That is management. And leadership is about inspiring others to do things they never thought they could do. So that shows how important leadership is in your company. And if you are either a HR or someone, owner, business owner, or some chairman of a company or boss of a company tuning in today, think about this statement. If your leadership skill is lacking, do something about it. Of course, I don't expect you as an HR to go to your boss, this company, I know leadership. Let's do something about it. I think you have to refine your communication skills. Make use of all the tools that you have with you. One way I can share with you is, how many of you seriously do an exit interview? Exit interview is not just filling up forms and calling the employee who's leaving to come to your office and have a chit-chat. There's so many ways to do an exit interview. Find out the reason why this employee is leaving. And then compile a report and submit a report to your boss. Boss, according to my exit interview, we found that this. And one of the issue is, which this person brought up, was leadership. Can we do something about it or not? Yeah. then at least your boss may not be so defensive. He may be more open to doing something about it. That's how you as a HR is able to bring change to your company, how you influence your boss or your management to do something good. Yeah? And if your project succeeds, you will get the job satisfaction. And as you continue to improve, the management will look upon you and say, hey, you HR, what are we going to do next? Hey, you, what are you become the subject matter expert. You become the person of reference. That's where you get recognized in your company. Yeah. So I would strongly urge you to look at all this and think of how you can bring improvement to your company. Yeah. Moving on, next is about poor performance. And just now I have shared with you, poor performance can happen at any stage. Yeah? It can happen during the requisition stage. Just now I shared with you the footballer. If I were to say, hey, go and find me a footballer, you will know what sort of footballer I want. Yeah? Same in your company. Yeah? During the requisition stage, how many HODs give to the HR an accurate, up-to-date JD or JS? Yeah. Most probably you say, oh, my accounts guy has resigned. HR, please go and look for a replacement. Yeah. Hey, what do you want this accounts guy to do? Yeah, you know lah, you are HR ma, you have been doing this all a while. Yeah, just go and find me one lah. There you goes. You know, if you go and find him someone who is good at doing accounts receivables, and later on you bring him in and you ask him to do accounts payable, and wouldn't that be a problem? Yeah, not a very big problem, but it's still a misfit somewhere. And in the end, you're going to blame who? And if that employee is not able to perform up to expectations, who are you going to blame? You blame the employee? Wait, I hire you to do accounts payable. Why can't you why can't you do that? That guy says, I'm all the while doing accounts receivable. How to do accounts payable? Now, that's recruiting, sourcing, your shortlisting, your interviewing stage. How do you test the candidate to find out whether that candidate is really the type of candidate that you want or not? Right? Last time when I was working as an employee, when I interview people for HR positions, I really test them everything about Employment Act to find out whether they know what they're talking about. Yeah? Some people say I'm crazy. Yeah? They say, this fella asks all the questions. Yeah, if you want to do HR, you better know. If you do not know, then I have to step in. It makes my life difficult. Before you make my life difficult, I make your life difficult first. So that in the end, when you come aboard, both of us will have an easy life. Yeah. So these are the things. We look at all these things, the onboarding process. Now, the onboarding process could be a very important process. Yeah. Well, some companies may be a bit more elaborate, particular. They prepare everything before the employee comes in. Right? And that is the first impression that you give to the employee. If he comes aboard and he says, wow, my table is ready, my computer is ready, or my stationaries are ready, that is a great motivation for him. Or compared, then the employee comes in, reports forward, and then there you are, you clank about, hey, where do we place him? Where does he sit? Where's the phone? Never mind, you operate first. Your phone line will come up 3 days later. Your computer will come in 1 week later, and that guy will be thinking, what am I here for? This 1 week, what am I going to do now? So in the end, he gets demoralized. The first impression itself is already no good already. Then he gets, this company, I don't think they are that fantastic. During the interview, they tell us they can fly. I don't think they can fly. Right? So these are the subtle things that may affect an employee's performance. Okay? Please look at it. And if for some reason you happen to have that guy happen to sneak past your interview process, then you have your probation process. Right? How long is the probation process? Well, we are all fixated with the 136, either 1 month, 3 months, or 6 months. Well, I don't think there's any law to say that we have to put a person on a 1 month probation or 3 month probation or the 6 months probation. You can agree on whatever probationary period. Let's say, assuming now during your interview process, you find that this candidate, well, he's good enough, but he's lacking in certain areas. And for that area, maybe you need 6 weeks to assess him, or 8 weeks, or 10 weeks. So we say, hey, okay, can we put you on X weeks or X months of probation, just for us to assess you on this area and your overall performance. So performance, probation, I mean, you want to put 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, is fine. I mean, let's say we recruit a welder, someone who does welding in your company. How long do you need to assess him to find out whether he's a good welder or not? Yeah. I think within 1-2 days, if his job is just to do welding, I will know whether he's a good welder or not. Of course, we may throw in a little bit of a buffer time to assess his attitude, his attendance, and all those things. But to assess him on his job, I don't think we need 1 month. Right? His ability to do a welding job, I don't think we need 1 month. Yeah. So these are the things which may affect performance. So look at it. And we tend to say that our employees are our greatest assets. Okay, so if they are our greatest assets, so make sure we put in the time and effort to really bring in the real assets, and not assuming that you're going to spend a few $100,000s to recruit a footballer. I'm sure you're going to study everything in detail before you bring him in. Yeah? Otherwise, as the computer language goes, GIGO, GIGO, if you do a lousy job, you're going to get you may get a lousy candidate, garbage in, garbage out. So be very careful when you are doing recruiting your employees. If you think that they are your greatest assets, please, as the HR there, insist or train your HODs to give you a detailed JS and a JD. Yeah? At least that will help you as the HR to source for the best candidate for your organization. Yeah? If don't be just the normal HR there and be intimidated by your HODs and so that. You should know. Yeah, in the end, what you know or what you think may not be what the HOD thinks. So that's the importance of the JDs and the JS and the JDs and all that, to make sure that you bring in the right candidates for the company. Otherwise, you may end up, managing a poor performer. Just share with you a story. There was once this company that wanted to build a depot on a piece of land where they can park their lorries and all that. So they looked around and they found a piece of land, nice land. They asked an engineer to go and study the land. And the engineer surveyed the land, measured everything, look at the design of the building, layout and everything. And he came in and said, yes, perfect, good spot. Yeah. Then, of course, the company spent quite a bit of money building up the depot and all that. And later on, at the end of the year, towards the end of the year, Yeah. It was a rainy season, and that place got flooded. And of course, all those vehicles that were parked in the depot suffered some water damage. Now the manager said, "Look, hey, you are the engineer assigned to look at this piece of land. What happened?" The engineer said, "Well, you asked me to look at the land. I looked at the land. Everything was perfect. How do I know that it's going to be flooded? You never asked me to look at whether it's going to be flooded or not. Now, who's to be blamed? Yeah? You're going to blame the engineer, or you're going to blame the management for bringing in an engineer who doesn't know how to look at the overall situation and just focus on his job." Well, it may be a story, but you know the moral of the story. Yeah. So please look into all that. So I've shared with you the JDs, the JS, and all that. Come up with a SMART principle so that everyone is aware of what is expected out of them. Yeah. And we all talk about attitude, skills, and knowledge during your interview. Make sure you assess the candidate on their attitude, skills, and knowledge, so that you can make the right decision. Yeah, and if you found such a candidate, then from there you have to give him the right tool set, yeah, the skill set. Make sure he has got the right skill set and the right mindset, so that he can perform up to your expectations. Because as we discussed earlier, sometimes poor performance is not because of the employee, it's because of the management. Sometimes we make the wrong decisions. I've even read in the internet, that we have promoted this person, and now he's not unable to perform his new job. Yeah. So we would like to revert him back to the old position. And in my heart, I was asking, whose fault is that now? Is it the employee's fault or the management fault for promoting him? How do you how do you come to the conclusion or decision that this guy is fit to be promoted? Now it's very demoralizing to the candidate to be promoted and then reverted back to the original position. In the end, you may have one demoralized employee. So, in conclusion, I will have this to say, that please remember Newton's third law of motion. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. And in as far as the company is concerned, I will also say for every non-performing employee, there could be also a non-performing HOD. Okay, back to you.
Hi, hello. Thank you, Mr. To. Right now, I'd like to call upon Mr. Daman with his presentation, talking about all the legal stuff on how to fire somebody on non-performance.
Okay, thanks, Supra. Okay, so let me just try and put this into context. And I think the most efficient learning for our participants today is going to be from question and answers. So I'm going to run through this as fast as I can, and then we'll open up for question and answers. So putting in context, we are talking about employee non-performance. If someone is not performing, and unfortunately you are having to let go of that person, what is the law? How do you do it? What are the downsides? That's what I'm going to be covering now. So Shadi, could you move me to the next slide, please? Okay, so the scope of my paper, basically, this is talking about dismissal for poor performance only, and it includes probationers, where you're dismissing a probationer on ground of performance. I will be talking about the legal principles, which I've touched on earlier, to support a dismissal on account of poor performance, the procedural fairness that you have to comply with to justify a performance-related dismissal. I will cover with you what I feel is a best-in-class successful performance-related dismissal. And I will touch about the pitfalls that you want to avoid when you're dealing with these types of dismissal. Next slide, please, Ashadi. Okay, so as I've always done in my previous sessions, the recipe for success for any employer when you talk about dismissal is we don't want to go to court. We don't want the employee to file a complaint at all. That's the best definition of success from an employer perspective. So we dismiss someone and the person doesn't even file a complaint. That's the best. The next one is even if we dismiss, if someone files, we go to court, but we defend that case. So that's what definition of success means, and I'm going to be sharing what we need to do to come to those conclusions. So the first one, if you want to avoid complaints altogether, again, perception management. Generally, an employee who accepts their dismissals were fair, don't file complaints. So how do we increase the chance of an employee accepting that he has been dismissed on grounds of performance and not wanting to file a complaint? Basically, the tools are you want to comply with procedural fairness. So when you talk about a performance-related dismissal, it is critical that the employee must feel that they were given a fair chance to improve. So if they feel that they were given a fair chance to improve during the PIP but did not improve, chances of them accepting and moving on without suing is higher. Now, the next bullet point I've talked about is treating people with respect and dignity. Yes, someone is not performing, but it doesn't mean you should treat them without respect, without dignity. The communication becomes really important, the third bullet point. How do you get across this very negative message of someone not performing, but to turn it to say, here we're doing this plan because we want to help you improve, right? So getting that communications across with respect and dignity, very important to help increase your chances of employees walking away without suing. For the second, if you end up being sued, how do you win in court? Again, same thing. You need to convince a judge that the dismissal is fair. How do you do this? You need evidence. Evidence which support that the dismissal was fair, which means you must show that you complied with the law, and you must be able to demonstrate through witnesses and other evidence that not only was the procedure complied with fairly, but the decision to let the person go because the gap in performance remained was there. So this is the recipe for success. This is what we're trying to do in this area. Next slide, please, Ashadi. So what are the legal requirements for poor performance? 3 things, as I mentioned. Number 1, employee must be aware or must be notified about the gaps in his or her poor performance. The employee must be left with no doubt. They must have clarity around what is causing their poor performance. Second requirement of the law is that sufficient opportunity must be given to the employee to close that gap. And the third requirement is, despite having informed the employee about the gaps, despite giving the employee sufficient opportunity to improve, the employee did not improve sufficiently. So please remember, the employer must be able to prove these things in court if it goes there. So how does a PIP come into this? Earlier when Supra asked about, must you have a PIP? And my answer was, you don't have to have a PIP. It's become the general tool of choice to manage an underperforming employee. So PIP stands for a performance improvement plan. It is a plan that you're going to draft together with the employee to help the employee correct and improve their performance gaps. Yeah. Typically, when you talk about poor performance, the challenges that we face are there's a high level of subjectivity. Whether the person is performing well or not performing to expectations, if it is not sales-related jobs where the targets are not objective, it can be subjective. The other challenge, and I think Mr. To also talked about this, how long do you want to give someone on a PIP? 3 months, 6 months. So you must be able to show that fair opportunity or sufficient time to improve must be given, right? Demonstrable assistance must be provided. So you must be able to show that the employer tried to help the employee close the gap. What's causing the gap? What's the root cause analysis? And then we try and close that gap. And of course, the biggest challenge that employers face is how do you prove that despite doing all of this, there still was a gap in performance which resulted in the company deciding that I have to dismiss the employee. So this is the legal context. So you have the legal requirements. I've introduced how the PIP is used, and you've seen there what are the main challenges that employers face when you're going through a PIP scenario. Next slide, please, Shadi. As already discussed, performance-related dismissals cover both probationers as well as confirmed staff. The slight difference would be probationers, they don't have security of tenure. So it is an implied understanding that the probation period itself is there to assess the suitability of the employee for the job, and it's also for the employee to assess whether this is the job that they want to do, right? So for a probationer, I wouldn't say that a PIP is necessary, right? But you still need to have some form of documentation to show the three things which I shared earlier, i.e. that the employee was told about the areas of poor performance, sufficient opportunity to improve was given, and despite having done that, there was still a gap. I've also touched on the fact that a probationer's maximum order by the industrial court is 12 months. And another important point is there is no concept of deemed confirmation in Malaysia. So if someone is brought in as a probationer, and if the company did not expressly confirm the employee remains a probationer. Yeah. So probationer is covered. Even if you want to dismiss a probationer, you need to comply with the process. Yes, you don't have to go through the full rigor of a PIP because the probation period itself is viewed as an implied performance assessment period. Now, what about confirmed staff? Yes, you can use a PIP for a confirmed staff. Obviously, there will have to be some evidence of underperformance which justifies the initiation of a PIP. Typically, a PIP is introduced after an employee has scored poorly in an appraisal, typically, but it could also come up any point in time when the manager realizes the employee is not performing to expectations. There's a significant gap and he wants to help the employee close the gap. That's when you use a PIP. Ordinarily, it comes after an appraisal where an employee has got a bad score and they want to help the employee improve that score. A PIP can be used. Now, I've put in that final point here. For very senior level staff, the C-suites and so on, the need for a robust prescriptive PIP is less apparent. The law recognizes that these type of high-level employees, excuse me, should know for themselves what they're supposed to do and whether they are doing what they're supposed to do. So for such high-level employees, there are cases where the courts are less rigid in having to have a PIP. Next slide, please, Shadi. My last slide that I have here is I want to share with you a best case example. So these are the points that you want to cover in a PIP. The first bullet point is you want to have clear evidence to show that the staff who's going to be on a PIP relative to his peers is not performing. So please don't go and simply put a ridiculously high target and put someone on a PIP when they don't meet it. It's got to be a target which is fair relative to the peers. He's not meeting the targets, and therefore that gives you justification to initiate a PIP, right? So you want to have some evidence to prove this, and you want to have some comparative data, if possible, to show that this particular employee, relative to other employees doing the same job, his output is much lower. If you have that, then you start the discussion with the employee, where the whole idea is to come to a common understanding with the employee. What is the reason for the poor performance? What's causing the poor performance? And that there is, in fact, a poor performance issue. So hopefully there is common understanding and an acceptance with the employee. You do the root cause analysis to identify what is causing the performance problem. And then the discussion to cover an agreement between employer and manager on the tools for improvement, what is going to be the next steps, and how long the PIP is going to be for. This then leads to the next stage, which is the PIP setting, where the PIP itself is a document which will clearly articulate what is the gap, clearly articulate what is the expectation, and finally, it confirms what are the tools that's going to be used to improve and how long the PIP is for. So you've got that documented. The next bullet point, throughout the PIP, you need to have regular documented progress monitoring. So the PIP on a monthly basis, you got to continue to monitor to see where the employee is compared to the gap, whether the employee is closing the gap or not. Of course, if they've closed the gap, you close the PIP successfully and the PIP is ended. But if it's not, you need to go through that process and until the end of the PIP. But if the PIP does not close positively, then you have a big problem. And that is what leads you to a decision. Is there still a gap at the end of the PIP? If there is a gap and the gap is not closed at all, right? If the gap has not closed at all, I would suggest that whatever that we have done has not helped the employee, you probably are looking at a dismissal, right? But if the gap is closing and the employee is moving in the right direction, you may want to think about, should I extend the PIP instead of a termination? So along these 5 bullet points, you need to make sure you have all the evidence recorded to justify the initiation, the rollout, and the execution of the PIP. And finally, the decision, depending on the gap in performance after the opportunity to improve was given. So this, ladies and gentlemen, is a best case example on how you use a PIP to demonstrate a dismissal which is justified if it ends up being in court. And that's all I have with you for you today. Thank you very much. Maybe back to you, Supra, for questions from the floor. I think, Supra, you're still on mute, Supra. It's like we're having some technology.
Hi, hello, sorry. Yep, got a tech hiccup here. Okay, let me get straight to the Q&A session, all right? Thank you, Daman. Okay, thank you, Mr. To. Okay, question 1. We found that sometimes in certain organizations, they put certain staff under PIP, but at the same time, they also take action against the staff through a DI. Is this legal and valid or a valid action? Mr. Daman, I think this is very legal centric.
Okay, so you see, a DI and a PIP are 2 different tools for 2 different types of issues, right? So a DI is generally a tool that you would use for serious acts of misconduct, whereas a PIP is a tool that you're using for performance management. So if an employee is on a PIP and at the same time you want to put him through a DI, it has to be for unrelated events. So someone who's on a PIP, but who has also, let's say, stolen something. So PIP is performance related, not performing well. But during the PIP, he's also alleged to have stolen something. Then yes, you can go in and do a DI for 2 separate events. But if someone is not performing well, you initiate a PIP, and then you do a DI for the person not performing well. That's not right. Okay, so the PIP is to manage performance, a DI is to manage a misconduct. It shouldn't be used for the same thing.
Thanks, Daman. Question 2. Would it be fair to transfer an underperforming employee to another department? Because it's basically transferring the problem but not rectifying the issue. Mr. To, you want to answer that?
Oh, you're on mute now, Mr.
You're
To.
on mute, Mr. To.
Well, it's all depends on the purpose of the transfer. Sometimes a transfer may be a good thing because a person who is not suited for a role may be suited to another role. So if that is the purpose that you transfer that person, then I would say, yes, that's a good move. But if you transfer someone just because you cannot stand him and just want him out of your way, then I think that is a bit of there's a bit of a malafide there, and it can be questioned in court, is it? Yeah, so it depends on the objectives. Back to you.
Thank you. What if the employee denies that he or she is not performing, even though there's sufficient evidence, and refuse to accept the company's PIP given? So what can we do? I think this would be something Daman would need to answer.
Okay, so to me, these are the kind of issues you will face when you have a lack of clarity on what the employee is supposed to do. So when you have a lack of clarity or lack of method of measuring what the employee is doing, there could be disputes. The employer says you're not performing, employee says I know I am performing, and you can't prove either one of them to be right or wrong. But I'm going to make the assumption here that the employer is right. Okay, so I'm going to make the assumption the line manager is right, that the employee is not performing and he wants to initiate the PIP, but the employee is denying or refusing to accept. Now, please remember, legally speaking, there is no requirement that the PIP has to be accepted by the employee before it can be implemented, right? So to me, if there is agreement and understanding with the employee around what are the areas of poor performance and what the PIP is going to focus on, that is best case. But if the employee refuses to acknowledge and accept, and indeed there is evidence to show that there is a gap, this is where you need to agree to disagree, proceed to initiate the PIP, even if the employee is not what you call it, willing to accept and agree with it. So you need to carry it on. It's going to be a challenging PIP, obviously, but it doesn't mean that if the PIP doesn't agree, you can't have the PIP.
Okay, thank you. Next question. What if an employee is hired by a BPO company, but the performance is actually managed by a client, right? Because like I hired somebody under my employment, but technically supposed to deal on behalf of another company, right? And the performance is managed by the client. So when there's requirement, the PIP period is only 1 month. There is a PIP review done between the client and the employee on a weekly basis. And if the PIP shows bad results, can the company right now proceed to terminate the employee? Daman?
Okay, so let me just get this right. So the employee is hired by a business process. It's a third party.
Business process outsourcing company. Yeah.
Yep. Okay, so that person is hired by company A to perform duties for company B, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And now the person is not performing well. So the question is, can you put him on a PIP? Is it?
Yeah.
Is that the question, Supra?
Can the client's the client's appraisal, because the
Yep.
client is actually doing the appraisal with the employee.
Yep.
Okay, the outsourced employee.
Yeah, you
So
could
can
do
you
that
take that and then use it?
for the appraisal. Yes, you can,
Okay,
because
so
that,
we can do that.
yeah, you're right.
And can I then terminate the person? But the question is, terminate the person is one, but if the probation is 3 months and the client doesn't want the person right now and he's only done the job for 1 month, can I proceed to terminate the person?
So this is termination in between the probation period, lah. Yeah. And if
Yeah.
you terminate on that reason, there are cases where the courts have allowed it, but it is highly difficult for you to be able to show that, because the court will say, why couldn't you give them the opportunity of the probation period? That was the promise that you brought the person on. I promise to give you 3 months to show whether you're suitable or not. But 1 month after, I let you go. Unless in that 1 month, the guy's output was disastrous, it's going to be very difficult.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Okay, bosses or HOD will ask HR to sack the so-called low performer. Any tips for HR practitioners to deal with such circumstances? I think the right question for Mr. Toh.
I think this will be a tremendously good opportunity for the HR to show that you command the respect of those people, to exert your authority a bit, and not to just simply follow instructions. If a HOD were to ask you to sack somebody, sit down with the HOD and tell him, now, can you tell me what are the grounds, that we have to justify the sacking or not? If he have, then okay, then you guide him along the way. But sometimes HODs, they just do not know procedure. That he may want you to sack him. Then you advise him on the procedure and the law. Yes, I can sack him, but if this case goes to court, who's going to answer for it? Are you prepared to answer for it? If you yes, can you write an email to me? Right? Then at least if things goes wrong, you have something to defend yourself. And if the HOD says, no, you just sack him, I tell him, then you tell him, hey, boss, if you got no grounds, then what you expect me to tell the employee that you're sacked? Yeah? So you as a HR there, you must be able to justify your actions. Ask the HOD to justify your actions and not just follow instructions. You want to do a termination simpliciter, yeah, I think you better get Mr. Daman's phone number ready. Back to you. Yeah, answer your question.
But Mr.
Yes,
Daman doesn't represent employees, just to clarify that.
Yeah.
Okay, this is a question for Mr. Daman. Okay, if a sales manager has got sales gap and he has informed the management and in performance appraisal that the sales could not be closed is due to the fundamental flaw in the company which is not controllable by him or her. The employer duly noted and somehow failed to rectify the flaw raised. After the PIP, can the employee being victimized and lost her case is industrial court?
So to me, if I were to listen to that question, I think the telling fact in that question is when the employee said, I can't meet the target because of things beyond my control, and the employer noted, that means the employer agreed. So if the employer agreed that you are not able to meet your target because of things beyond your control, it must follow that you cannot sack the person for not meeting the target. So that it's likely that the employer will lose that case in court. Now, if, for example, the employee says, I can't meet the target because this is beyond my control, and the employer says, no, this is not beyond your control, this is well within your control, and then they go and sack him, and if it goes to court, the court will then look to see, was this within your control or not? If it was within your control and you didn't meet your targets, dismissal justified. If it was not within your control and therefore you couldn't meet your targets, dismissal unjustified. So that part becomes crucial. And since the question said it was noted by the employer, I would imagine that means there is some truth to the fact that that's beyond the control of the employee, and in which case you can't hang the employee. It's like the COVID now, right? Because of the pandemic, you can't be having the same kind of outputs as before. You can't blame the employee for it.
Okay, next question. What would come first? First warning letter or PIP?
Yeah. So again, there isn't the law doesn't say. It's not like the alphabets where you got A, B, C, D, E, F. You don't go in that way, right? Generally, though, after the PIP is initiated and when you have the first assessment, and if that assessment is negative, there's a gap still, then that assessment will be like a warning to say, hey, we've had the PIP 1 month in, I've reviewed, there's still a gap. I need, please be warned that if you don't close this gap during this PIP, there could be. So I would say, from a logical sequence perspective, PIP followed by warning.
Okay, next question. I've got an employee on PIP and he improved in the first month, and subsequently in month 2, his performance started declining. What can I do? Mr. To?
I think that's where during the PIP you have to set smart goals or maybe milestones along the way. Let's say you put him on a 6 months PIP. Well, maybe you can agree on the first month you are expected to achieve this. Second month you are expected to achieve this. Yeah. So then we measure him as we go along. As Mr. Daman said, not only improve, he must improve sufficiently. And what is sufficiently is best if you can quantify it. Let's say you expect a 1,000, 100,000, maybe first month 20,000, second month 30,000, and it goes on so that by the 6th month or whatever or maybe earlier he can hit 100,000. And if he doesn't improve sufficiently, it just doesn't justify him to be off the PIP. So it's up to you whether you want to further extend the PIP, or tell him, bro, I've given you sufficient time. You have not been able to improve sufficiently. So I think it's fair that we shake hands and say goodbye. That would be my take.
Okay, I got quite a few questions, but I'll do the last question here. Okay, we got an employee. Okay, this company adopts a 360 kind of an appraisal system. So the employee does a self-assessment. Employee, of course, obviously rated he or himself very high, right? Then with the peer rating and the ratings from, so it kind of brought down the overall scales. So therefore, the employee is not happy with it and refused to endorse the appraisal and say the appraisal is now biased. How do we handle a situation like that?
I would think that if that 360 program was done transparently, there shouldn't be any grounds for dispute because it applies to every other employee. Yes, everybody would naturally like to rate themselves a bit higher, but you can't influence your peers. Right? If your peers think that you are of that rating, then most probably it's true. Why would your peers want to rate you down when you're nothing against each other, right? So to me, I think if the rating are done transparently, it should be okay. Okay? If he doesn't want to agree with it, he want to dispute it with the ratings, I think that is within his prerogative. Back to you.
Thank you, Mr. To. Daman, you would like to add anything to that?
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, again, you see, in court, this comes up a lot of times. In court, you're always going to get two versions of events. The versions are quite different. Employer says one version, employee says quite a contrary version. And ultimately, logic is the best judge. So, from the facts, what is the more logical conclusion? That is how the judge or the court will deal with it. So while you may have an employee who says, no, I think I rate this amount, I should have got this score, and the peer says something else, the superior says something else, and so on. The judge will ultimately make a call based on logic. It doesn't make sense if the employee rated himself so highly and everybody else rated him lowly, right? So logic seems to suggest that looks like an inflated rating by the employee. But that's how it is in law. I wish you could have 100% evidence to show exactly what happened, but you never get that.
Thank you, Daman. Thank you, Mr. To. Thank you, everybody. Just to sum up our session, I have outlined 7 key points for all of you to take away. First is like to emphasize on the importance of having a performance management system in place within the organization. It's not just about buying a software or having a software, but a tool or a method of measuring the employee performance. That is fair, right? Second is to link the performance management tool towards achieving the organizational goals. You know what? Somehow you need to have whatever performance you're doing in your vertical units or business departments has got to link to the organizational performance. All right. And next is to conduct the performance reviews more regularly. If possible, try to do every quarterly. If it is really you can't do it, half yearly. I am not in favor of an annual thing. I think because it's way too difficult to actually measure someone's performance once a year, right? Something like a quarterly thing, make it into a habit. I think it gives you a much better situation where you are not only trying to find fault on your employee, but you're actually really monitoring the performance. And if things are going wrong, you're able to address the issues quickly there and then, right? And next is to act quickly and address the issues of non-performance. So you can work with the employees if there are performance gaps, whether you require to do a PIP, coaching, training, counseling, whatever not, please put that as step. The next step would be to ensure this is something Daman knocks on my head all the time. Document, document, document. Correct or not, Daman?
Absolutely.
So everything you do, every assessment, document, document, document. And after all this are done, and if it's still no performance, then I think you should be able to go with your dismissal process. But when you're making the dismissal process, my last point is take emotion aside. Look at the facts. Okay? So I think from the art and science today, this is what we really wanted to deliver to you so that you use whatever information that you've gained from today and apply in your daily business situation so you are able to manage the performance of your employees better. You are able to also manage the non-performers. If you can manage a non-performer to become a performer, isn't that great, right? Instead of trying to manage a non-performer into trying to exceed them, right? So always be objective. All right. Thank you so much, everybody. Please do join Sukhdev every Thursday between 2 to 3 p.m. to understand more about EPLI. Till we meet again next month, the cases have gone up to 9,100 today. So please stay safe and stay healthy. Take care, everybody. See you.